The first question this week comes from Dennis, and he asks, how to bring up weak muscle groups. Example, side and rear delts, and what kind of frequency would you look at? All right. So when it comes to weaker muscle groups, the very first thing that I would think about is how are you actually executing the movements for those muscle groups? Are you getting a good mind muscle connection for your side delts and your rear delts? And some people it's the lats. And I actually have a question later about how to feel your lats while training. So I'll cover that right now. When you're training your lats, one thing that really helps is when you crunch down to the side to where you're training your lats. So if you're doing single arm rows, kind of doing a little bit of a side crunch, when you do those can be really beneficial. All right? Also, when you're doing like pull downs, thinking that you're pushing your chest up to the bar. Pushing your chest up to the bar can really help. When you're doing your rowing movements, thinking pushing your chest out. So as you row in, pushing your chest out to the bar. Those can really, really help. Also, I really like performing like a lat pullover before I move to like my horizontal rowing or my vertical pulling and stuff like that. That help. I get a little bit better mind muscle connection with the pullovers, and then when I move to a rowing exercise or something like that afterwards, I find it to be beneficial. All right, so those can help with that. But when it comes to weak muscle groups, really focusing on, hey, am I executing my lifts properly? Am I getting a good mind muscle connection in the gym? That's number one. All right, after that, I would follow the process of, hey, am I training within my volume landmarks? Am I doing, God dang it, I have those jeans hanging up in the background again. Sorry about that. One of these days I'll get that fixed before I start the video. But where was I going? Yes. So then you look at, okay, first, execution. Is that on point? Second, am I training with my volume landmarks in between my MEV and my MRV? So am I doing enough volume to where I'm getting pretty good palms? Maybe I'm getting a little following day fatigue in those side delts and stuff like that. And am I doing not so much to where my performance is decreasing, or I go in to train my delts again and they still feel fatigued and that sort of thing? All right, I would look at that. And if you can answer yes to those, so you're training between your MEV and MRV and your execution is on point, then you may consider maybe playing with a little bit higher frequencies. So maybe instead of doing 6 sets in 3 sessions per week, you try to do 3 or 4 sets in 5 sessions per week or something like that. I think that there could be some benefits to doing that. So maybe you play with your frequency, but man, I would say that if you're already training your delts like 3 to 5 or 6 times a week, and you're training within your MEV and your MRV and your execution is on point, man, you might just have to accept that this muscle group is going to be a little bit of a slow burn. And you might just have to trust that, hey, over time, as long as I keep training with my MEV and my MRV on executing my movements on point, then it will happen over time. It just might take a little bit more time for those muscle groups. All right. So I hope that helps. That's what I would look at though. Next question. Does it make sense to cycle calories while gaining? So my interpretation of this question when I hear calorie cycling would be like, would it make sense to, during the week, would it make sense to maybe go down to maintenance on off days or in a slight deficit on off days and stuff like that? And, I don't think that calorie cycling is the worst idea. However, I think that if you let's tackle each of these. Would it make sense to decrease your calories on off days and maybe try to eat at maintenance? Maybe that's not the most terrible idea at all, but I would say that when you have stimulated your muscles for muscle growth, that's probably going to last for 24 to 48 hours, somewhere in there. So even on your off days, you're probably in that kind of anabolic window a little bit. So if you're still in that window, would it make sense to not be in a calorie surplus? I'm not sure if that would make a lot of sense, especially considering that calorie surplus, protein turnover is requires like 20% of our calories burned through our like basal metabolic rate. So highly energy taxing demands for protein turnover. So because of that, we probably want to have plenty of energy for being in a positive protein balance. And it seems as though being in a 200, 300 calorie surplus per day is probably a relatively good idea. Plus, this can help with some anabolic signaling, like just being in a calorie surplus and gaining weight will likely lead to increases in lean body mass. Now, you're going to gain a greater proportion of lean body mass when you're lifting and training and that sort of thing, but it seems to be inherently anabolic. So because of that, because of the costs of the energy costs of protein turnover, because of the potential detriments of being in a calorie deficit and the detriments that might have on anabolic signaling and stuff like that, I think that it would still make sense to be in maybe a slight surplus on your off days. Now, are you going to be expending less calories on your off days? Therefore, you should decrease your calories to maintain the same calorie surplus. I also don't think there's going to be a huge difference in calorie expenditure. It seems as though for a 60-minute session, maybe like 200 to 300 calories through lifting weights. Now, if someone has more lean body mass, that's going to be on the higher end. So if someone's more of an intermediate to advanced bodybuilder and they train for 90 minutes, could they reasonably burn 400 to 500 calories in that session? Yeah, I think you could. But would you also burn probably like 300 or 400 calories if you just equated your steps and you went for a walk during that period of time? Yeah, I think it would be pretty close. And we also have potentially some adaptations that might occur to exercise to where we burn less calories throughout the day. Like, hey, maybe after a big leg session, you're more tired throughout the rest of the day and your NEAT levels are lower. Well, if that's the case, then maybe there's even less of a difference between training and off days. So I guess my answer to this question is that I don't think it's probably a good idea to be in a calorie deficit on off days if you're trying to maximize muscle growth. And I think that, if someone told me that after 2 years of training on their off days, they were in a slight deficit and they saw really good results, would I be that surprised? No, probably not, especially if they were still gaining at a reasonable rate and gained weight over time. But if you told me that person A was in a consistent calorie surplus each day and they gained about 1% of their body weight per month and cycled through gaining and cutting phases, and over the course of 3 years, they gained 20 pounds muscle, and you had me compare that to person B who did calorie surplus on training days and deficit on off days and that sort of thing. And after 3 years, if you ask me if they'd be in the same place, I'd say it's probably more likely that that person B is going to experience some wheel spin and could very well look back over several months to a year and not really get further towards their goals. So I think that it would make more sense to be in a consistent surplus throughout gaining phases and go through periodic gaining and cutting phases rather than trying to mix them too much, because I think that you are more at risk for wheel spin. Now, does that mean you can't decrease your calories a little bit on off days? No, I don't think so. I think that if you know that you're way less active on off days and you're not as hungry and your hunger cues are telling you that you're in more of a surplus on off days, okay, I would be fine with decreasing calories by 200 to 300. That wouldn't bother me at all. But I just think that in a lot of cases, it probably makes most sense to not cycle calories a whole lot. And I just think that I'm not saying it couldn't work to cycle calories a little bit, like having a little bit of an energy deficit there. But I think that for maximizing muscle growth, probably not a good idea. And also puts yourself at risk for potential wheel spin. All right, so that's what I think about that. The next question was struggling to feel the lats, but hopefully I answered that earlier. And this question is, what does your personal training volume look like? So last week I went over my split, but if you haven't watched that real quickly, it is a chest, biceps, hamstrings, and then it is a triceps, back, and quads every other day, 6 days a week. And I train each muscle about 3 times a week, except for my delts. I train more like 5 or 6 days a week. My traps, I train 5 days a week. And my forearms, I train 3 days a week. And my abs, I train 5 days a week. And as for volume, for my upper body, like when I go through gaining phases, it looks like 4 sets per session, 3 days a week in week 1, then 5 sets, then 6 sets, then 7 sets. So my weekly volume goes from 12 sets to 15 sets to 18 sets to 21 sets, then I deload. That's for my upper body, my entire upper body. It's for my chest, my arms, and that's direct arm work. So 4 sets per session, 5 sets per session, scaling 3 sets each week. That's for my chest, arms, and for my back. My back, like some people report having a higher MEV for their back, but man, after like 3 or 4 sets, I think that I'm right there with my MEV. I got a nice pump. I feel a little sore fatigue the next day. So I think that 4 to 7 set accumulation is really good. For my legs, it's more so I stay around 4 sets per session all the way through, because that's probably MEV-ish. Like I still get a decent pump and I still get a little bit of soreness here and there, but I am the typical bro and care less about my legs. So I keep my legs around 4 sets. For my traps and forearms, I'm usually around 10. Well, for my forearms, I'm around about 9 sets per week, but with all my pulling exercises and stuff like that, I think that's still MEV or a little greater. And for my traps, I'm probably around that 10 to 14 set range, somewhere in there. And probably same for my abs. All right, so that is how I structure it. During the dieting phase, I more so stay around about 5 sets for my upper body, and then I stay around about 4 sets for my lower body. And that seems to work out pretty well, because that MRV is probably a little bit lower, and I just want to play it safe, so I'm maintaining muscle to stay in more so that middle ground rather than at the low end of where my MEV may be at, because the MEV may be a little bit higher because you're more catabolic, stuff like that, while you're going through a dieting phase. All right? And then my next question, how to deal with hunger while dieting. Number one thing that you can do, the very best thing you can do to deal with hunger, I think anyways, is to kind of embrace it and accept that, hey, all this hunger is a sign that I'm in a calorie deficit. That's all it is. It's just a physiological response or a perception of hunger that, hey, we're energy restricted, but remembering that, hey, you chose this, you chose to be in an energy deficit. You're lucky that you can decide when you can be in an energy deficit and an energy surplus, and embrace a little bit of hunger. Be okay with being a little bit of hunger. Like, there's not a whole lot wrong with it. Is it annoying sometimes? Yeah, but it's the end of the world. Could there be a lot worse things? Yes. So I think embracing it's the best thing. Other things, though, of course, you can increase your food volume. I wouldn't increase your food volume right away. So when I say increasing food volume, eating more less calorie dense foods, so salads, celery, carrots, stuff that takes longer to chew, that can be helpful as well. Drinking a full glass of water before you have a meal, that sort of thing, that can help. But I wouldn't go crazy with it, because I think that if you go crazy on the food volume and a ton of artificial sweeteners and stuff like that, you're going to set yourself up to you've kind of primed yourself for large meals of higher quantities of food. So then after the diet, if you switch your foods back to more calorie dense foods and stuff like that, or you go off your diet, you're just kind of setting yourself up for a very big meal there and a lot more hunger, I think, anyways. Because I think that you kind of get used to the hunger a little bit, and after a couple of days, it's not so bad. So you can do that, staying busy, having a lot of things going on, not thinking about food, that can be beneficial as well. All right. And the final question. So this was actually from a conversation I was having on Instagram, not super related to fitness, but I thought I'd throw it in at the end of this. And it was about what is kind of my dream car is the question. And, you know, I'm not like the biggest car guy in the world, but I like a nice car, don't get me wrong. And me personally, I would rather the experience of driving a pretty nice car every day than like having a mansion. Like that doesn't really appeal to me, but having a nice car kind of does, if I'm just being honest. And my favorite car is probably a matte black Jaguar F-Type. Those things are sweet, they sound awesome, but I will probably never have one. And the reason for this is because I would probably go the route of an electric vehicle. So if they make an electric F-Type, that would be sick. But the reason I say that is because my sister, she's an environmental scientist, teaches environmental science, and she's brainwashed me into caring about the environment and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's important. And I would probably go the electric route. Although, interestingly, electric cars aren't always, they're not like totally safe for the environment, if that makes sense. Like they still have carbon emissions. You still have carbon emissions and stuff like that when you produce that electricity, when you produce the battery, stuff like that. But net, they are never worse than gas cars and almost always better. And in the long run, definitely better as we get more efficient at making that stuff and that sort of thing. So hopefully you didn't just hate that last question. Sorry if you did, but I'll see you next week.